destination homes in communities across the province. Today, I just want to thank the committee for the opportunity to discuss Bill 185, Cutting Red Tape to Build More Homes Act. This bill includes important measures that will help build more homes faster, including long-term care homes. The government's commitment to 1.5 million new houses by 2031 is critical to supporting our growing and changing population. Ontarians are aging quickly. Ontarians are aging quickly. In fact, those over 80 are increasing by nearly 4 times the rate of the rest of the population. And by 2040, the number of Ontarians over 80 will nearly double what they are today. Many will be able to age in the home they own or move into apartments, retirement, or seniors communities. But for about 20%, or 1 in 5 of those over 80, they will have complex needs that can only be provided for in long-term care. These are individuals living with things like advanced dementia or significant mobility and care needs. And increasingly, those who move into long-term care today do so from hospital, often following a healthcare crisis. This crisis often means these seniors can no longer manage their needs in their house or apartment. These same Ontarians also often have family members, caregivers, and friends who are supporting their care. And as we know, these caregivers are often themselves overwhelmed and burnt out. Long-term care then provides high-quality care and a place to live well for those who need it most, and it is our duty to ensure that care is there for them. Today, 43,000 people are waiting for one of the 76,000 long-term care spaces in the province. This need will continue to grow. The government has made a historic commitment to support the building of 30,000 new long-term care spaces and modernize the province's oldest homes, which contain 28,000 spaces. No other jurisdiction has made this level of substantive investment in building a high-quality, safe, modern, long-term care and seniors care system. These commitments are critical to ensuring our seniors have the care that they need in their local community. Additionally, while long-term care provides care, long-term care homes provide care, they are first and foremost a home for the people who live there, and an important source of accessible, affordable housing for seniors with complex care needs right within their communities. Long-term care team members work every day to provide high-quality clinical care. They also support residents in living out lives that bring meaning and dignity. In long-term care, our homes specialize in helping people live well and focus on what matters most to them. Long-term care sits on a continuum of housing and care. For some, staying in their single-family home with home care supports will be enough for their aging needs. Some will need more care and will need other housing settings to match those needs. From naturally occurring retirement communities and apartment buildings to purpose-built retirement assisted living communities to long-term care. And the important part of this, and what we see as important in the government's housing targets, is ensuring our seniors have access to housing and care within the communities they know. These are the communities where they raised their children, where they worked and are still leaders, and where they can continue to participate as much as they're able. Bill 185 is an important part to ensuring our seniors have appropriate, affordable housing where they live, and is why the government has included long-term care in its housing commitment targets. But long-term care home development is particularly complicated, involving multiple layers of government. It can take 3 to 5 years from an application to the opening of a long-term care home if all goes smoothly. There are, however, many roadblocks that can significantly delay or derail projects. A number of the measures proposed in Bill 185 will help make navigating long-term care development more efficient and will prioritize long-term care projects to ensure that homes can be built quicker and collaboratively across levels of government. Bill 185 provides important tools to meet the government's long-term care commitments and ensuring long-term care will be there for those who need it most. In Bill 185, the government has also added provisions to support municipalities with process improvements and expanding the infrastructure that will encouraging housing starts, such as the Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund, the Municipal Housing Infrastructure Program, and the Building Faster Fund. Any investments in stronger municipal infrastructure and expediting processes will support more housing for our seniors, and that includes long-term care. Additionally, obtainable housing is crucial for a growing workforce. In many communities, especially rural communities, a lack of housing is a factor in healthcare staff recruitment and retention. Bill 185 would also enable expedited approvals for community service facilities. The government said this will first start with schools, but we hope additionally long-term care homes will follow soon after. And the bill's measures to improve access to land, particularly in urban areas where land is difficult to obtain, will be critical to achieving the government's housing and long-term care targets. In closing, I would like to emphasize the importance of the measures in Bill 185. This bill is an important step to enabling long-term care homes to be built as quickly as possible, to modernize our long-term care system to meet our significant demographic challenges, and to ensure Ontario's seniors have access to care in their communities where and when they need it most. Thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. We now will go to the no-dem evictions.
Hello, committee members. My name is Natalie Irey Dutuzinga. I am joined virtually by Lindsay Blackwell and by David Steinman, and we are here to speak on behalf of No-Dem Evictions. So for any who don't know who we are a tenant-led coalition who fights for affordable housing and for community-led development, but we are against profit-driven development. We are in favor of some of the proposed changes in this bill, and one is an amendment to the Development Charges Act 1997, reinstating studies as eligible costs to be recovered from DC revenues. Another is an amendment to the City of Toronto Act 2006, eliminating application fee refunds introduced in Bill 109. There are, however, proposed changes that are aimed at speeding up development, but that we find problematic. So first and foremost, the removal of third-party appeals at the Ontario Land Tribunal opens the door to potential conflicts of interest within municipal governments while silencing the voices of the people they represent. We request that the right for all third-party appeals to be protected. And like the City of Toronto, we are also opposed to the Enabling Greenfield Development Amendment as its potential negative impacts include the loss of permeable lands, agricultural lands, and natural spaces, additional regional congestion, negative economic impacts, and increased risks of downstream impacts on municipalities. And to quote Councillor Perks, this is the Enrich Every Land Speculator Act. There are thousands of plots of land in the Greater Toronto Area that suddenly, on paper, are worth more money overnight, including lands that protect the Don River, the Humber River, and our farmers. This is literally about land speculation. This has nothing to do with housing. Moving on to the Planning Act, a new subsection states that official plans no longer need to include parking facilities within protected major transit areas. We are strongly in favor of reducing emissions and reducing personal vehicles on the road. And most of the tenants that we represent, they don't own cars, they have no interest in owning a car. However, this subsection effectively discriminates against an entire segment of the community, raising the question, for whom are we building housing? You may not be aware, but some of the people who live in downtown Toronto, as an example, that require parking, either their own or visitors, they are people with accessibility issues, people who require care from personal support workers or visiting family members, people who run small businesses, and people who require a vehicle for their employment. These are all people who will not be able to live in these buildings. The most common rebuttal we hear is that such people should use public transit, including Wheel-Trans, as well as car share services, taxis, and Uber Lyft drivers, who, by the way, are themselves people who require a vehicle for their employment. Unfortunately, for anyone who has to rely on those services, they are either not well maintained, grossly underfunded, not accessible, or more costly than owning a personal vehicle. If you would like examples on any of these points, we would be happy to share them. Currently, the City of Toronto does not require new developments to include parking. This leads to cases such as 25 St. Mary, which is the largest fully occupied purpose-built rental building approved for dem-eviction so far. And it's going to see all of its parking disappear in the new development. This parking erasure is essentially a type of full-on eviction for many seniors, tenants with accessibility issues, including those on ODSP, and some workers. It's a really great way for developers to incentivize tenants to not return to their entitled replacement unit. So we strongly recommend that the province make an amendment to ensure that, No dem evictions, we recommend that there is a required minimum parking, including accessible and visitors parking, in proportion to the units of new developments. We also want there to be a requirement to replace all current existing parking in all rental buildings being redeveloped, and for returning tenants to have the right of first refusal on the replacement parking. We also want to see increased funding to public transit across municipalities. In Toronto, that would be the TTC and Wheel-Trans. Also, eliminating parking is often spoken of under the umbrella of reducing emissions and creating more 15-minute walkable cities, but we can't ignore the fact that developers welcome this in the interest of reducing their costs. The problem is that this will even further incentivize developers to target lands along main transit lines like the subway line, which is where the highest density already exists and where most purpose-built rental buildings are currently standing. So no dem evictions, we do advocate for more housing along the main transit routes, but not at the cost of massive tenant displacement without adequate protections in place. So we strongly recommend that the province make an amendment to ensure that all tenants receive adequate protections, similar to what eligible tenants receive at the Tenant Relocation Assistance Plan with the City of Toronto. And we would be happy to discuss in greater detail what those protections would look like. There's also an amendment to expand a municipality's ability to address the allocations of housing enabling infrastructure, also known as use it or lose it. No dem evictions is generally supportive of this measure, insofar as it can help mitigate against rampant land speculation. The City of Toronto reports since 2005 that 73% of development applications with notice of approval conditions have applied for a building permit within 2 years, but that means that 27% did not. And tenants in those buildings are living with high levels of anxiety and uncertainty in a state of limbo that can last for years and has been compared to psychological warfare. In my building, KingSett Capital indicated a timeline of anywhere between 2 to 8 years before tenants would be affected, which is far too vague. So No Dem Evictions recommends the strengthening of provisions by shortening time frame permitted for municipalities to enact conditions on developers who are not making headway on housing projects, especially where rental replacement units are required and where additional affordable housing is planned. We also request that the restricted timelines begin as soon as the rezoning and project applications are approved by the city, because there are too many cases where both applications are approved and the developers just sit on the land for an extended period of time. So we hope that you will take our recommendations into account, and we welcome further consultation.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We now will go to the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition.
Glasses. My name is Katie Krylov. I am a board member with the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. We are a nonprofit group that brings together resident groups that defend community health and safety and the environment from the devastating impacts of gravel mining in Ontario. RGMC has the long-term goal of winning regulatory and legislative reforms to safeguard health, water, and nature, ensure community participation in land use decision-making, and honor treaties and obligations with First Nations within aggregate mining in Ontario. On behalf of RGMC, I want to voice our strong opposition to the proposed amendments to the Planning Act in Schedule 12 of Bill 185 that would remove the public right to appeal the adoption and amendment of official plans and zoning bylaws to the Ontario Land Tribunal, the OLT. Land use planning decisions can significantly impact local watersheds, air quality, access to natural spaces, and the health and safety of communities. We urge the committee to maintain the long-standing appeal rights for the public to protect their community's health and local environment from poorly conceived development applications. The proposed amendments would limit appeals at the OLT to specified persons, which is narrowly defined in Section 1 of the Planning Act as an electric utility, Ontario Power Generation, Hydro One, or any company in the municipality operating a natural gas utility, oil or natural gas pipeline, or telecommunications infrastructure. The amendments will mean that ratepayers associations, local community groups, and environmental organizations will be banned from appealing land use planning decisions to the OLT, even if they have participated in the municipality's decision-making process. These proposed amendments would result in serious unfairness as private developers maintain their rights to appeal. If a municipality does not accept an application for an official plan or zoning bylaw amendment, private developers may still appeal that decision to the OLT. However, if a municipality does approve of a development application, even if the proposal is environmentally damaging or may cause public health impacts to the local community, the public would no longer be able to challenge the municipality's decision at the OLT. There is no justification for this serious infringement on public rights. There is no evidence that third-party appeals are slowing down development in Ontario. Instead, there is evidence showing that third-party appeals are extremely rare, comprising approximately 0.5% of all appeals and only 0.25% of all contested hearings. Hardly the red tape that the Act claims to target. In fact, it is developers appealing the decisions of municipalities that make up the majority of OLT cases. These amendments would exacerbate as well the unjust treatment of First Nations under the Planning Act by eliminating their right of appeal and leaving in place only the notice regulations that only give notice of decisions to the chief of every First Nation council if the First Nation is located on a reserve, any part of which is within 1 kilometer of the area to which the proposed official plan or plan amendment would apply. Many critical environmental achievements in Ontario's land use history are the direct result of third-party intervention at the OLT and its predecessor at the Ontario Municipal Board and Local Planning Appeal Tribunal. Some examples of community groups that successfully appealed to prevent or alter developments in environmentally significant and sensitive areas include Protecting Escarpment Rural Land in the Niagara Escarpment, Innisfil District Association, and Lake Simcoe, Environmental Defense and Save the Rouge Valley Systems on the Oak Ridges Moraine and Greenbelt, and there are many more. Indeed, many of the local community groups that the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition works with and supports rely on their right to appeal municipal zoning changes at the OLT to raise legitimate concerns about the environmental, health, and safety impacts of proposed gravel pits and quarries in their neighborhoods. These are people who care enough about their communities and the future of their communities to engage with the bureaucratic world of municipal zoning and planning decisions. They also, on many occasions, are required to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars to hire lawyers and various environmental experts to advise them and testify at their appeals. RGMC is also concerned that the proposed elimination of the public's appeal rights will have retroactive effect pursuant to Section 323458 of Schedule 12. Bill 185 proposes to retroactively eliminate public appeals if hearings have not been scheduled by April 10th, 2024. This may automatically terminate a significant number of public appeals. This will have a financial impact on members of the public who will have their appeals dismissed after having potentially spent significant resources on appeal filing fees and retaining experts and lawyers. Overall, Bill 185's ban on third-party appeals is an unjustified benefit to developers at a significant cost to our democracy, the fair administration of justice, and undermines sustainable development efforts. This is not the first time this government has proposed the removal of rights of citizens to appeal amendments at official plans and zoning. The same measure was proposed in Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act. That ban was ultimately removed at committee due to overwhelming testimony against it by environmental groups, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and others. The Reform Gravel Mining Coalition asked the committee to do the same for Bill 185. We recommend removing sections 3.1, 3.3, and 5.7 of Schedule 12, the sections that seek to remove the public's ability to appeal the adoption of amendment of official plans and zoning bylaws. And we also recommend the Attorney General should disclose all internal memoranda and external communications with municipalities and developers requesting the proposed change to third-party appeal rights. I'm happy to answer questions.
That concludes the presentations. We will now start the first round of questioning. I was going to start with the independents, but I guess we'll go to the government first. MPP Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the presenters, both virtually and in person, here this afternoon for your deputations. My question is to Chris from the Ontario Long-Term Care Association. Do you believe, and I think you alluded to, but I just wanted to get you on the record for sure, do you believe a long-term care home is a home?
Absolutely. Long-term care home is a home. It's enshrined in our Act. It's the first principle in the Fixing Long-Term Care Act, that long-term care is a home. It's a place where we strive to help people live well when they need it most.
Thank you for that. I just want to, obviously, our government's issued a variety of MZOs to get long-term care homes built. Has that been beneficial, in your opinion, representing the association, to get those projects started?
Absolutely. I think this government's done a significant amount of work to help, I've explained that the process is really complicated, to help navigate that process and help long-term care homes get moving. And I think particularly the changes to MZOs will be significantly helpful in moving even more projects forward.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you could elaborate, I know you briefly mentioned in your remarks, on some of the need to expedite some of the approvals in the process and some of the delays some of your members may have experienced across Ontario.
Yes, absolutely. So I think, we've highlighted it, but it does take about 3 to 5 years to get through the process right now to build a long-term care home in Ontario. That's if the process goes well. It's because our homes are navigating multiple levels of government, both we're working with our own ministry to achieve approvals, working with our local planning in our municipalities, as well as our homes need to secure financing to support that project. And so what we see is that, our long-term care projects are taking longer and longer, but thanks to this government's investments and movements forward and changing things through things like Bill 185, we've seen more homes start that process, breaking ground. 67 homes have broken ground since April 2022. That's almost 10,000 new spaces. And so we're seeing ourselves moving forward, and Bill 185 will help expedite even more.
So just to confirm, that's 10,000 new homes
new spaces
since 2022.
Yes.
Okay, wow. That's very impressive, Chris, and I thank you for your members for that. Chair, I defer the remaining time in this session to my colleague.
MP Kondratopoulos.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you as well to all the presenters for being with us today. I also would like to pursue some more questions with Chris from the Ontario Long-Term Care Association. I had the privilege of being the parliamentary assistant for long-term care for several years, so I'm very, very familiar with many of the great work that your association and others have done. And I wanted to just mention for the record, when our government first got elected in 2018, we had inherited, in fact, a situation where virtually no long-term care homes had been built in the previous 8 years under the previous government. I believe the number was 611 net new beds in the entire province. And I can say very safely that in my own community of Oakville, North Burlington, we already have over 1,200 new beds in our community. Our commitment, as you know, is to build new and redevelop beds of 58,000 new long-term care spaces right across the province to be able to meet the growing demand of a seniors population, but also a population where some of the seniors' needs are significant in terms of health issues. And I know the folks that are in long-term care homes, in fact, have very complex health care needs. So I wonder, Chris, if you could speak a little bit to the needs and how being able to build more rapidly would actually address those health care needs.
Absolutely. I think I've quoted some of the numbers, but we know that our population over 80 will double by 2040. That's just 16 years. 1 in 5 of those seniors will need long-term care. Their needs are just too complex. And so expediting those homes and expediting redevelopment is critical to meet the government's targets by 2029 so that we can ensure that we have long-term care there for those who need it when they need it. I think I highlighted our wait list today are at 43,000. If we aren't able to expedite those homes, those wait lists will continue to grow by about 38% over the next 10 years. So we want to make sure those homes are there so that people can have them, they have access to care. I also just want to say the story behind, right? If someone's at home and they aren't receiving the care they need, you have a caregiver usually behind them that's overwhelmed and stressed. There's someone who's struggling to just maintain supports in a home when they really needed to be in long-term care. I know a lot of times those individuals end up in hospital, the crisis. They stay in hospital, and we see these pressures now in our healthcare system. And then those individuals need to get to long-term care. And so to reduce pressures on the healthcare system, just make sure people are getting the care they need where they need it. That's why this bill is important, and expediting those long-term care homes and those redevelopments are important.
Thank you, Chris. And the government very much agrees that the care they should receive should be in the correct setting that's more suitable for the individual. Could you also give us some sense of, we've been talking about innovative building techniques, including modular construction. Could you give us some sense of whether there are, in fact, uses like this that could actually apply into a long-term care setting?
I'll say I think our homes are looking at some of the changes that are being enabled through Bill 185. But what we are seeing is, and I think we do have very defined kind of standards for how our homes are built, but there's some opportunity for innovation there. And I think Bill 185 opens up the opportunity to look at how could we build homes differently. I think more importantly are kind of related. How do we build homes for residents? And how do we use innovative building techniques to build better homes that are built better for those who we care for? So I think what we're seeing is our members are really committed to finding those solutions and working with those innovations on those innovations with government.
You also mentioned that from approval to construction, completion may be anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and I would think 3 years is probably very optimistic given the current environment. So could you speak to us a little bit about the approval process and where some of those delays and barriers currently exist for you?
Yeah, I think there's delays across the process, and we're seeing within our own ministry. Our minister has done significant work, as well as kind of the public service, to figure out how can we speed up approvals within the ministry. How can we look at things like other methods for approving designs and standards. And then we also have approvals at the municipal level that can take some time. And for a while there, we saw governments kind of working across each other. And what we're seeing now is with certain changes like Bill 185, different levels of government are able to work better together to ensure that we're faster in those approvals and we can get homes to constructors sooner. I think additionally, the top-up program that the government has introduced has really helped to move projects forward quicker. The first top-up, I know, is re-announced in budget this year.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the official opposition, MPP Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all three of you, as well as the individuals who are online to come today. I know you all have busy lives, and we appreciate it. I have questions for each of you. I'm going to start with Chris. Chris, I have two questions for you. First off, I was wanting to know what specifically in Bill 185 you think will spur the construction of long-term care homes. You mentioned a little bit about MZOs. I was wanting to know if there's anything else. That's my first question. My second question is, in our riding, we do not have any long-term care homes being built. What we're seeing is long-term care homes that are they're an aging facility. They are closing. We've had Vermont Square close. We've had Cedar Vale close just north of us. And I fear that St. George, long-term care home on St. George Avenue, could be possibly closing as well. I'm not sure, but I'm worried about it. What is your association's position on protecting the long-term care homes that we've got? They're my two questions.
I'll take the first one. I think, what we're seeing in Bill 185 is first the ability of community service facilities to be prioritized will be critical, especially if long-term care homes can be built into that. The work on NZOs, and then also I think, and I hinted to it a bit, but just the work being done to support municipalities and infrastructure. We see a number of homes where we're waiting for infrastructure and just supporting that, particularly in rural communities, that's critical. On your question about closing, I think it's first important to start off that I don't think any home closes lightly. That's not an easy decision. We're seeing small homes across rural Ontario closing. These are homes run by generations of families who are committed to caring for their residents. And so I don't think none of those closures are simple. I think what we're seeing is the impacts of years of not moving forward and not getting long-term care homes redeveloped. Our homes have dealt with significant barriers, both in a capital program that wasn't working until 2020, and then we dealt with a pandemic, which limited a lot of our capital program. Staffing, which we're continuing to struggle with, but working through thanks to the government's investments. And then operational funding stability, which thanks to budget, we've seen some changes and we're seeing homes finally creating some stability there. But ultimately, I think the key there is to have a capital program that's moving forward, to allow those older homes to redevelop and to make sure that there's a path forward for them. I'd say specifically in Toronto and rural Ontario, we're looking at those are unique situations that are quite difficult to develop in. And so working with government on innovative solutions for those areas where there may be more barriers to building those homes.
Thank you, Chris. My next question is to Natalie as well as Lindsay and David on the phone. But Natalie, because you're here, I'll start with you. I have two questions for you. The first one is, can you give all of the committee members just a rundown on the scale of demolitions that are happening in Toronto? And what measures overall do you think the provincial government should be taking to protect tenants if they find that their building is slated to be demolished?
Of course. So currently, just in the city of Toronto itself, we see that there's an estimated 100 purpose-built rental buildings that are occupied with tenants that are slated for demolition, and we anticipate that this will affect over 10,000 people just in the city of Toronto. We know that this is also happening in Hamilton, in Ottawa, and in other cities across the province. What we would like is that currently, as per the RTA, tenants who live in units in buildings that have 6 units or more, they get 3 months worth of rent, their current rent, not market rent, and they also get a right of return. Anybody who has less is not entitled to it. What we want, and there's also another thing where people who apply after an application has been submitted, they are not entitled to a right of return. What we want is a model that is similar to the tenant relocation assistance plan in Toronto, and we want it to be installed on a provincial level to ensure that all tenants throughout the province in various cities receive the same amount of protections. And those include a rent gap payment top-up. This is a payment that will help to bridge the difference of their current rent along with the new market rent during the period of displacement. We want them to have a right of return with the same facilities that they previously had. We want more transparency of the process so that people are aware of what is happening. We want it to be for all tenants, regardless of how many units there are in the building, how long they've lived there, whether it was before or after the application. There's a lot more details that we can add, of course, in a consultation process. It is also because we don't want to offload this problem onto tenants who live in single resident houses. Maybe there's 3 floors and each floor has tenants. We are for densification. We just don't necessarily agree with the idea of destroying these multi-level buildings that are in perfectly fine condition and displacing hundreds, sometimes thousands of tenants when we could be densifying on plots of land where there are single homes. But we want to make sure that those tenants are also protected.
Thank you for bringing that up. This is affecting Toronto Centre and University Rosedale and Spadina Fort York a lot, where we're seeing these very big purpose-built rentals that are being slated to be demolished. And the people who live in them, the many seniors, younger people, workers, they're just terrified that they're not going to be able to live in the neighbourhood that they love. And they don't know where to go. There's no affordable place to go. And they're very worried that the right of return won't be enforced, so that they fear they won't be able to move back into their home once the construction of the new building is complete. So, yes.
I just may add one additional point, since we are also talking about long-term care homes. A lot of seniors who are affected, that could prematurely push them into going into the long-term care system because they don't have any other options for housing, and we already know that it is a system that is overburdened, and what we want is for tenants to be able to live independently as long as possible with care in-home before moving to the next stage.
1 minute.
Sure. I'm going to ask my question, and then, Katie, you might have to answer it in the next round too, so we'll see. I have 2 questions for you, Katie. First off, I'm curious to know how your organisation has effectively used third-party appeals to protect land and water. And second, could you clarify specifically for us what recommendations you'd like to see in Bill 185?
Yes, so it's RGMC itself doesn't do third-party appeals, but we work with many citizens groups that do across the province, but mainly in southern Ontario. And so, there are many that are currently waiting for their hearing to be scheduled, and those will be canceled. And with no refund of any of their expenses if this goes through. But yeah, I mean,
Thank you very much. She was right, but you'd have to wait for the next round for the answer. We'll now go to MPP Anand.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to welcome all the presenters here. Along with this Chair, we have Nina Deeb in our room as well. So welcome, Nina. And something which Greater Toronto Authority also wanted to come and represent. They could not come because of the overwhelming response clerk has received. So I would just want to say to everyone who has not been invited and want to submit their submission, you can still do it through the chair to the committee. My question to Natalie, no demevictions. I'm just trying to understand, and I thank you for coming, and I was looking and reading over. No demoviction is a collection of tenant association supporting the tenants through education, organization, and action towards policy change. So thank you for your work, especially in the education. Typically, a lot of people who come to the committee, they will say, we want less reliance on private transportation or cars. We want more in public transportation, and that's why we want less parking. I hear it the opposite today. You're kind of saying, no, there should be a parking.
So what I'm saying is that there should be, at the minimum, a replacement of current existing parking, because there are people who rely on it for many reasons. If you would like specific examples, I can give them to you, including tenants who live in my building and tenants who have approached us about their concerns. And it is also because we want to make sure that all of the new developments, they're not just for fully able-bodied people, they're not just for people who do not require care, they are not just for people who don't require a car for their work, because then we're just omitting an entire section of the population. So again, we would like it to be in proportion to the development. We are not looking for massive new parking spaces for thousands and thousands upon vehicles within a tiny city block.
The second thing I noticed that when we were talking about the tenancy, so you were talking about, in your way or view, what is an ideal landlord or an ideal model of tenancy? What would that be?
An ideal model of tenancy or landlord?
Well, you can't separate them. They have to be together. So landlord, for an example. What kind of landlord is an ideal kind of a landlord?
Well, an ideal landlord would be somebody who is transparent with tenants with regard to what is going on, ensures that there's proper maintenance of the building. If accessibility accommodations are required, that they are met. That they are also available and not evasive, as we have seen certain landlords, and who do not apply for AGIs, especially consistently, because we see that happens in a few buildings where there's AGIs that are applied for year after year after year. And most of the AGIs that we have seen have come from corporate landlords and not even the little mom and pop landlords. We want housing to remain affordable. It is a space that is offered for housing. It is not something meant for financialization and for profit.
As you know, that the tenants who are facing eviction due to demolition of the rental units are entitled to existing protection under the Residential Tenancy Act, RTA, wherein they must be provided at least 120 days notice in writing to the landlord's intention to demolish or convert, the right to a hearing at the LTB, and another rental unit acceptable to the tenant, or receive an amount equal to 3 months, as you also was talking about, if the property has 5+ units, and 1 month's rent if it is less than 5 units. So my question to you would be, in this situation, what advice, because education is a big piece for you guys, so what advice do you have to help tenants who are being evicted because their building is being demolished? Are there ways to do this without discouraging investment in the new housing supply? What would you like to tell them?
We would like them to get organized, to inform themselves of what their rights really are, so that we ensure that they can have the minimum that they are entitled to. We also would like them to, if they are in a municipality that does not afford them further protections, to ensure that they will continue to have a place to live, that they push their municipal governments to change policy to ensure that they have a right to a place to live and can afford it. But mostly, we would also like like tenants in Ontario as a collective to push the provincial government to put these in place so that these don't become per municipality policies that can change here or there. We would like every tenant in Ontario to have the same rights.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. My next question is to Chris from Ontario Long-Term Association. Chris, this morning we heard it from or maybe yesterday from the universities, and they were talking about it takes 16 months to build and 42 months to get the approval. What is your opinion about would you agree that the long-term care homes have faced delays in navigating the municipal approval processes, and would an expedited process be helpful in getting shovels ready in the ground faster?
Absolutely. So I think that our homes consistently, and we talked about that 3 to 5 years, which is hopeful in many situations, are due to kind of those approvals processes. Once we can get shovels in the ground and start building, we can build quickly. And so working through that process, and things like Bill 185 have helped expedite that process, will help get homes built quicker in the province.
Simply put, yes or no, do you think Bill 85 is a right step in the right direction?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. That's it from me, Chair. MPP Christian.
MPP Hogarth, you have 1.2 minutes left.
Okay. I actually want to start with Natalie. Just a little bit about the use it or lose it clause. I was talking to some of my constituents in Etobicoke Lakeshore, and they were very positive about this schedule. I think it's we see a lot of inactive properties, right? So we always think that could be a rental unit, or that could be a 4-plex or a 6-plex or an 8-plex, apartments for others, or affordable housing. Your thoughts on this in Bill 185? Do you think that will help the rental market? Do you think it will help spur some growth faster? Because at the end of the day, our goal is to get shovels in the ground, get homes built, all kind of houses, affordable houses, attainable houses, which are two very different things, or just a place for people to live. Your thoughts on the use it or lose it clause?
I think in principle it will help. However, the provisions can be strengthened so that it is from the moment that the application and the permits are approved, so that tenants are not left waiting for years upon end, because that is something that land speculators do, and that is about speculation and money and not about housing.
Thank you for the work that you do. My final question is for Chris.
Very much. That concludes the time. With that, we will go to MPP Fife.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, for no-dem evictions, when these calls come into our offices as MPPs, it's usually seniors, it's usually women, it's usually racialized folks who have, found against all odds, something affordable, and really, that's their home, right? And as MPPs, we often there's not a lot of recourse for us. But Bill 185 was an opportunity for the government to start to think about purpose-built, non-market housing, right? Truly attainable housing that is so desperate. I wondered if you might talk about how important it is as a solution to the housing crisis in Ontario for the government to focus on that particular window, which they are stubbornly, dug in about. Just how hopeful it could be if the government actually, went into the non-market housing business specifically for those folks.
Sure. I can say it's not just important, it's necessary. It's really necessary to build more affordable housing and fast, and to prioritize that over for-profit projects, because the majority of people cannot afford the new developments that are being built. So again, who are we building this for? And we understand that development is necessary in a growing population. We are not against it. But it goes back to the question of where are they going to go? If we're not going to build more affordable housing, these people have nowhere to go once they are evicted. There are also provisions that allow for an applicant after 20 years of a replacement unit to apply to change that unit to a market unit. So somebody who has lived in the replacement unit and went through the whole dem eviction process, 20 years later, they could potentially be evicted and have even less to fall back on. So we really need, it kind of just shows how there we're talking about a crisis now, but we're talking about a crisis that's going to be like 20 times worse in a few decades, and it's coming a lot faster than we think. And we know that building affordable housing takes time to do it well, so we really do need to start doing it now.
Thank you so much for that. And just a quick question for the Reform Gravel Mining Coalition. You know, the Auditor General's report on aggregate and gravel, it was scathing around who's getting permits, how fast they're getting permits, and how the land is being treated. Did you, I mean, particularly I would say in Waterloo Region, there are so many open applicants right now for licenses that are not, nothing's happening with them. A vast majority, they're just essentially land banking them for the future because they see this window of opportunity where the AG said, you know, inspections are not happening, violations are not being upheld, fines are not being charged. Can you give us a high-level recommendation for this government and how important it is to get reform gravel mining back on track?
Yeah, I mean, the report from the Auditor General did call attention to a lot of problematic issues with the regulation, with the monitoring, with enforcement of permits and licenses for gravel mines. I mean, it also draws attention to the fact that there are no real known records of supply for Ontario because companies aren't required to release how much are in the reserves of gravel mines that are already there, and yet they'll still be going to open more. So there's a lot to reform in terms of how they're permitted. I mean, right now they're also treated as temporary use, which really restricts the amount of environmental assessments that go into permits and licenses. But we know from that report that they are not temporary, that they lie dormant for years and years and years because it's cheaper to keep them open and not use them than to rehabilitate them. So the rehabilitation that's supposed to happen is also not happening.
That's a really good point. I meet with the gravel folks, the aggregate folks, and you know what they've said that some of them do want to close their pits and rehabilitate them, but MNR, it takes 7-8 years. So there's problems on both sides, right? I mean, if we're going to have these open pits and, you know, the owners want to close them, they want to rehabilitate them. They're supposed to, but getting the approvals from the MNR has proven to be filled with red tape. I mean, it's ironic.
I will say that a lot of the groups that we work with as well, I mean, a lot of people citizens groups who are opposing new pits and quarries are already surrounded by pits and quarries, and a lot of time they report to us that, you know, they're doing the job of monitoring that the MNRF is not doing. So they'll report when suddenly there's blasting and rock flies at people's houses, on people's cars. It damages people's houses and cars, or suddenly their sky is so full of dust and particulate that you can't even see your hand in front of you, and that's covering your car and your driveway and your house, and they'll report it and they get nowhere when they report it. So yeah, there has to be a lot more in the approval process as well as the monitoring and as well as, I mean, you know, if we look at other locations, you know, there's a lot higher fees per ton of gravel that's extracted. Ontario doesn't even charge enough fees to cover the bureaucratic needs or administrative needs of the MNRF, the AFA. Recycled aggregate is actually, there's a lot of potential there.
I wish we had more time to talk about that. I'm just going to pass to my colleague so she can finish her question set.
I'd like time to finish your answer to the question that I had, the second question, which is what recommendations would you like us to introduce to Bill 185?
Yeah, well, to answer your last question, I mean, probably the most kind of well-known success story of a citizen group going to the OLT in the gravel mining world anyways was to challenge an expansion of the Nelson Quarry that is in Burlington and is on the Niagara Escarpment. It's a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve, and it would have also impacted, Class A farmland. And they overturned that permit, partly because of the discovery of endangered.
Thank you very much. That concludes the time for that presentation. It also concludes the time for this panel. So with that, I want to thank all the panelists for a great job in preparing for this hearing today and for the able way you presented your position. So we very much appreciate that. The next panel is, what did I do with it? Oh, here it is. The next panel is the Ontario Real Estate Association, Waterloo Federation of Agriculture, and the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario. And as they're coming forward, we will go through the rules of engagement. Each presenter will have 7 minutes to make their presentation. At 6 minutes, I will notify you that there's 1 minute left. I won't say left, just 1 minute. At 7 minutes, I will say thank you, and your mic will be cut off, and we will go on to the next item. We do also ask each presenter to identify themselves prior to their presentation to make sure that we can attribute the Hansard copy of your presentation to the right person. And so with that, the first presenter will be the Ontario Real Estate Association.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. I believe, Chair, we have our president joining us remotely. So do I stall for 6.5 minutes?
To be fair, if we could, if the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture does not have someone on the other end that needs to be on, we could turn this around and let them go first, because we are a little ahead of time because we had some time saved during the last presentation. So with that, we'll turn it over to the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture.
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Mark Reeser. I am a farmer from Wilmot Township in Waterloo Region. I am Vice President of the Waterloo Federation of Agriculture. And I would like to focus this afternoon on Bill 185's transfer of planning authority from Waterloo Region to the lower tiers and its potential to negatively affect agriculture. But first, I'd like to put it in context, so please bear with me. We live in a very special place here in southwestern Ontario. We have a wonderful temperate climate, we are moderated by 3 Great Lakes, and we have highly productive soil. Farmland in southern Ontario can grow a longer list of fruits and vegetables than anywhere else in North America, with the exception of California. Yet we are on a trajectory to lose half of our farmland in Ontario by 2051, primarily to development. We realized in Waterloo Region about 50 years ago that without visionary planning, our farmland would disappear. So in 1973, we began a journey to plan and build the most innovative urban community in Canada, the most attractive place to build homes and businesses, and at the same time, protect and enhance a flourishing agricultural countryside. The tool to do this was and is regional government and regional planning authority. It worked. We as a region are far more than the sum of our parts. Without visionary regional planning authority, we would not have the following, and I have a list. Things that are unique to Waterloo Region in North America. A regional water quality program known across North America for its unique partnership between the region, the Conservation Authority, and farmers that incentivizes water quality improvements in the countryside. Secondly, the countryside line, that hard boundary between urban and rural that has been maintained since 1973 and has protected our valuable farmland. Number 3, the environmentally sensitive landscape designation protecting the headwaters of our cold water watersheds from development. Number 4, the protected countryside designation that protects the Waterloo Moraine and the aquifer underneath it. Waterloo Region is the biggest user of underground water in Canada. Number 5, a light rapid transit system now running near capacity, not found in any comparably sized city in North America, a system that has enticed and enabled billions of dollars in housing and development and industry and commerce along its route. And number 6, and perhaps most importantly, regional governments has allowed us to successfully achieve intensification. Between 70 and 80% of all new dwellings are built within the urban envelope. That's an intensification rate higher than anywhere else other than Toronto. If Waterloo Region had the same urban density today as it has in 1973, there would be no farmland left in the region. It would all be urban. Visionary planning at the regional level has been an unparalleled success. Waterloo Region is a facilitator of, not an impediment to, housing. Our planning regime here in Waterloo well, I'll say it this way. Our planning regime in Waterloo should be the template for planning in all of Ontario. The evidence is there for everyone to see. 3 thriving cities, 3 universities, employment opportunities that other municipalities can only dream of, and some of the best food-producing land on the continent. We don't have to invent anything new. Waterloo has already done it for us. Don't be seduced, intimidated, and coerced by those who argue that we have no choice but to sprawl. We have a choice. We all have a choice. And the farmers of Waterloo and all of Ontario encourage you to choose wisely. Choose to support communities like Waterloo Region that actively and purposefully seek to build places that you, your children, and their descendants will want to live and work. Is Waterloo's form of regional government perfect? Of course not. Anything can be improved. How can the province support our efforts to preserve the landscape, build houses, and encourage and facilitate job growth? Support Waterloo's regional government structure. It works. And number 2, restore regional planning authority in our official plan. In conclusion, we ask that you support Waterloo Region, its innovative policies, prudent and visionary planning that allows us to advance our vision of a vibrant, prosperous, and sustainable municipality that respects both the landscape and those that live on it. And finally, remember this: there is only one landscape, and the people, the natural environment, and agriculture all have to share it. We can have the best of both worlds: a place to live and a place to grow, a place to work and a place to grow food. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Our next presentation, we will now go back to the Ontario Real Estate Association, and I believe now the people are virtually on the line. So with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Hudak.
Thank you, Chair. You've done this before, clearly. I'd like to introduce our president, Rick Kedzier.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Rick Kedzier, President of the Ontario Real Estate Association and an Oakville-based realtor. Joining me virtually is my colleague, Kathy Poland, President-elect and realtor in the Quinte area. And with you in person, obviously, is CEO Tim Hudak. OREA represents Ontario's real estate professionals. In fact, we are the largest trade association, or one of the largest trade associations in Canada, with nearly 100,000 members. Every day, my fellow realtors and I help our clients find a great, affordable place to call home, where they can raise a family and make a lifetime of memories. But homeownership remains a distant dream for a lot of hardworking people, and it's becoming harder to make that dream a reality. Just 5 years ago, in 2019, the average price of an Ontario home was $594,000. Today, it's $890,000, a 50% increase. This issue is not isolated to urban areas. The affordability crisis is spread far and wide, affecting communities from Windsor to Waterloo, from Oxford to Oakville. In the Quinte area, for example, where our president-elect is from, the average price of a home has nearly doubled in the last 5 years, currently around $613,000. At AREA, we want to ensure future generations will be able to achieve the dream of home ownership. And so it is our pleasure to be here today to share our thoughts on Bill 185, the Cutting Red Tape to Build More Homes Act. AREA has focused our advocacy efforts on housing, supply, affordability, raising the bar on professional standards and ethics within the real estate, and modernizing the sector. Today, we'll be focusing on affordability and supply through the lens of modernization. This includes critical zoning reforms, infrastructure funding reforms to lower housing costs, and introducing new models of home ownership in Ontario. At this time, I'll pass the floor over to AREA CEO, Tim Hudak, to speak further.
Well, thank you very much, President Rick and Chair, members of the committee. Great to see you here today. As Rick indicated, the big problem in the province of Ontario is we have more and more people chasing fewer and fewer homes, and it's become a cruel game of musical chairs for people trying to get in the housing market or to move up when the kids come along. The main problems here, Chair, are rampant NIMBYism. We've had interest rates that have been too high for too long now that inflation is under control, and just too much red tape that slows down building and drives housing costs away. The government brought forward the Housing Affordability Task Force. I had the honor of sitting on that task force, Chair, and there were 55 recommendations. I'm pleased to report back, as I did in February, that 76% have either been fully implemented or are on their way. For government reports, that is a commendable record. But there is more work that needs to be done, and we're seeing more initiatives here in this bill before the committee today in 185 that we strongly support, particularly around new options to finance water and wastewater infrastructure. Really, if that's done through a utility model, as the government is looking at, I know other parties are as well, that could relieve up to $50,000 to $60,000 off the price of a new home to help people get into the marketplace. Other initiatives limiting parking minimums, building secondary suites to make it easier, mass timber structures up to 18 stories, great move. Business service standards for permit and licensing services, awesome. And a greater ability to get modular homes built, perfect. Stay the course, and 185 does that, helps check off more boxes. Let me focus, Chair, and have to get into questions later if you like, on three more things that should be done I want to emphasize. And there's no doubt that bold action is going to get homes built. Number one on this is the government should move towards 4 stories as of right across the province. This is really going to be the key for many first-time home buyers to get into the marketplace, as well as for empty nesters to downsize and open up the family home for somebody else. Look, if you can build tear down a wartime bungalow, whether you're in Oxford County, in Toronto, or Waterloo, and build a 4-story monster home, that's your right. We support that. You own the property. You've worked hard for your money. But you should also have the ability then to knock down that wartime bungalow and build a duplex or a triplex or a 4-plex. These are affordable homes to help people get into the marketplace. Number 2, we'd like to see, this is part of the Housing Affordability Task Force report, upzoning along transit corridors and major roadways. The government is making significant investments in transit. It makes a lot of sense then to allow upzoning along there, as well as conversion of commercial properties into residential units. And third and finally, Chair, new opportunities for home ownership, new models that we probably haven't thought of in the past, particularly for Ontarians. Black Ontarians have a very low home ownership rate. Indigenous peoples have a very low home ownership rate. We need to do more to help communities who aren't in the housing market get in. If you come from a family that has a lot of equity in their home, you can borrow from the bank of mom and dad. If you're renters, it's harder. So new models around co-ownership, shared equity programs, for example, helping disadvantaged communities get in the market will make a huge difference. Chair, my President-elect Kathy Pullen is going to bring some more perspectives from what she sees in Quinte. But I want to reiterate, you're on the right path. Just steel the spine, implement these ideas, and it can help make that Canadian dream of homeownership a reality for more hardworking Ontarians. Thank you, Chair.
1 minute.
Chair, members of the committee, as President-elect of AREA, I can tell you one truth today. We cannot solve the housing affordability crisis without increasing housing supply across the province, from Toronto to Belleville, from purpose-built rentals to new homes. Families across Ontario strive to find a safe, affordable place to call home in their community of choice. This is what drives me. It's what drives my fellow realtors in the work that we do each day. As realtors, we want to continue to do this work to allow us to help people find a great place to live, but we cannot do it without further action. The legislation is a good step. As the housing market continues to shift and change, now is the time to continue to
implement. And hopefully we can get the rest of your presentation in during the question period. Our next presenter will be the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Uncle Ernie. Good evening. Good evening, committee members. My name is Asquith Allen, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs at the Federation of Rental Housing Providers of Ontario, or FRPO for short. FRPO has been the leading voice of the province's rental housing industry for over 30 years. We are the largest association in the province representing those who own, manage, build, and finance residential rental units. We represent more than 2,200 members who own and or manage over 350,000 units across the province. And today I'm pleased to have the opportunity to provide FRPO's comments as the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs studies Bill 185, the Cutting Red Tape to Build More Homes Act 2024. I'll start by providing a brief overview of the current state of Ontario's rental market. Our rental market has significantly tightened over the last few years. Earlier this year, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation released its annual rental market survey for 2023. In Ontario, CMHC reported a vacancy rate of 1.7% as of October 2023, a decrease in 3.5% from October 2021. CMHC reported that vacancy for more family-sized units, such as two-bedroom apartments, is even lower at 1.6%. In terms of new supply, there has been some positive movement since the provincial and federal governments announced the removal of HST from purpose-built rental developments. Over the last 4 quarters, a total of 5,976 units started construction, which amounts to a 174% increase from the 4-quarter period ending Q3 2022. However, starts are still down from 2021 levels of over 7,500 units, and this is primarily reflective of the high interest rate environment. Our pipeline of units under construction does remain strong, with 22,064 units under construction as of Q1 2024. Now moving on to provisions in Bill 185. The bill contains several changes that would impact our members in their day-to-day development considerations, as well as other changes that impact the system in general. First, in terms of measures that are positive for rental housing builders in Ontario, the government is moving to remove minimum parking requirements in all major transit station areas as they're known. Or MTSAs, sorry, as they're known. Arbitrary minimum parking bylaws that could result in parking that is higher than what market would otherwise supply is not good public policy, nor is it helpful to builders. Reducing parking results in better environmental outcomes due to fewer car trips, increased ridership for transit, healthier communities due to more neighborhoods being planned as walkable and complete communities. Parking also adds significant cost to developments. Depending on the local situation, such as bedrock conditions and how many floors you need to dig, a single parking unit could add over $100,000 in cost per parking space to new developments. FRPO supports the move to let the market determine the appropriate parking level in a new development, as opposed to the arbitrary parking minimums that would result in more parking being built than the market would otherwise build. The government is also moving to make pre-application consultation meetings voluntary at the discretion of the applicant. Previous measures in Bill 23 that required a refund of the application fee if a decision was not made by the deadline resulted in many municipalities shifting the work to a mandatory pre-application stage. This did not help any party involved in the process, and it did not result in the intended outcome of fast-tracking approvals. In fact, in some situations, applicants were stuck for extended times at the pre-application stage, perhaps even longer than they would under the previous regime. Accordingly, FRPO supports the government decision to make pre-application consultations voluntary at the discretion of the applicant. And there are also some measures in Bill 185 that are somewhat challenging for rental housing builders in the province. The government is pulling back the 5-year requirement to phase in any increases to development charges. This means that developments would have to pay the higher DC or a higher DC than under the Bill 23 regime at the time when project economics are already strained. At a time when we need to build more housing and developments are facing significant interest rate headwinds, FRPO does not believe adding more cost to housing is the right decision. In addition to removing the 5-year phase-in, the bill also reinstates studies as eligible DC costs and reduces the DC freeze period from 2 years to 18 months. Both changes increase cost in housing in addition to the impact of removing the 5-year phase-in. Bill 185 also seeks to ban most third-party appeals for both municipally initiated and privately initiated zoning and official plan amendments. The intention to limit delays as a result of third-party appeals is applauded. However, not all appeals are frivolous in nature. The government should differentiate between truly frivolous appeals, for example, ones by resident groups who simply want to oppose all development, also known as NIMBYs, with legitimate appeals. Developers often file appeals to adjacent projects to protect against impact on their developments. These issues are often settled through the mediation process or decisions through the Ontario Land Tribunal process. Additionally, landowners with development projects would be third parties for municipally initiated official plan or zoning amendments. There could be legitimate issues impacting their development as a result of a citywide policy. So appeal rights would need to be protected in that scenario as well. FRPO supports a more scoped-down ban on third-party appeals where legitimate appeal rights are protected. In summary, Bill 185 includes measures that are positive for Ontario's rental housing industry. However, it also includes measures that would add more cost to building more rental projects in the province. I thank you for your time and would be happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. We now will start with the questions. We'll start with the official opposition, MPP Fife.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all delegations. We know you're busy and we appreciate your time coming here today. Mark, I want to start with you because what's happening in Wilmot Township right now is shocking. I watched the OFA video of the farmers who came before Regional Council, forced expropriation of 770 acres of prime farmland, no discussion, no debate. They've been approached by real estate agents who appear to know that this land is up for sale. They've been approached by an American corporation called CanAcre who told them $29,000 an acre or we're going to expropriate on behalf of the region. And then we also saw developers go in prior to all of this in January offering $57,000 an acre. Silence from our duly elected representatives in the region. No environmental assessment outside of the official plan. What do you think the motivation is here? Because it does seem like Bill 185 certainly opens the door for the Wild West of expropriation of prime farmland in the name of a mega industrial site. I wanted to get you on the record, please.
Thank you for the question. I am always saddened when I see farmland disappear. I'm 2 concessions away, so yes, it will affect me. The loss of farmland is a huge issue, but I would suggest that the lack of process is what concerns a lot of people who aren't farmers. Fairness is so important these days, and when people don't see fairness in their government, they lose respect for government, and that is sad and unfortunate. These days, when we don't have respect for our institutions, it doesn't bode well. Secrecy and deals done behind closed doors, while they may be necessary in very select cases, I think they are not looked on favorably by the public, and I would suggest that it is best for any government to be open and transparent and recognize and respect the views of everyone in the community.
The government and the Premier, when he came to the region, he said they put the call out, right? They put out the call out to municipalities to find large, swaths of land. But at the same time, also, the Wilmot Mayor is also seeking, I think, almost 2,000 acres for new housing. It's interesting that the Minister for Economic Development said that an EV plant couldn't go there because there's not enough water for an EV plant. People don't understand that Waterloo Region is one of the only municipalities in Ontario that depends 80% of the source groundwater for our drinking water. There's no pipeline. There's no plan B here. You mentioned in your opening comments that water quality and protecting the Waterloo Moraine is something that Regional Council traditionally has put an emphasis on. How do you square this? Because this is a risky project that will change the entire landscape of Waterloo Region and directly goes against everything that they've done, including their own regional plan that says, we want willing partners. These farmers, are those farmers willing partners to have their land expropriated?
The answer to that is probably no, but I'll answer it in a different way. And that is, again, people respect process.
Yeah.
Process has not been followed. People look at that negatively, and it's unfortunate. Process is important because it lays everything on the table. People can see that there are options, and then they can be part of the choosing of those options. And then they have a hand in it, and it becomes something that they own partially. Yeah. In this case, it hasn't happened, and there's a visceral reaction, and that is, this isn't fair, this isn't right. So let's do it right in the future. Mm-hmm. That's the best for everyone.
Yeah. Well, I do agree with you that traditionally Waterloo Region has been a template, a leader in finding that balance between agriculture and urban, and not compromising on the quality of life for people in the region. So, and I take your point that we're losing 319 acres of farmland every day. It's going to run out eventually, right? Like we should know better in 2024. Is my point. But I do appreciate your words that you brought today. Tim, I'm going to go over to you and real estate agent. The realtors across the province. You did tie in your comments around rampant NIMBYism. And you know the recommendations. You're on the committee, the government's own committee. When the Premier of the province says, I can assure you 1,000%, you go into the middle of communities and start putting up 4-story, 6-story, 8-story buildings, and right deep into the communities, there's going to be a lot of shouting and screaming. This is a massive mistake. And then this is another quote. It's off the table for us. We're going to build homes, single dwelling homes, townhomes. Now, the Housing Commission or the Housing Committee recommended 4plexes as of right. The government has 3plexes as of right. The next time you see the Premier, will you please tell him that a 4plex is not 4 stories, 6 stories, or 8 stories? I would really appreciate that. But isn't this the very definition of NIMBYism by Premier Ford?
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Chair, I used to sit in that very chair.
I know
and
you
I'd
did.
throw a curveball or two as well.
Yeah.
Look, when you see, Chair, I think we'd all agree, single-family, duplexes, triplexes, right? We want to go for a basis there. When you look at the best 4plex examples out there where they exist in our province, elsewhere, you really can't tell them apart from other homes. They tend to be 2 stories. Toronto, as you may know, MPP Fife has gone through with this. They have a 3-story cap as part of their bylaw. Look, if we really want to make a difference for average folks to get into the market, Not everybody wants to live in a condo all their lives. Not everybody can afford the single family home with lots of space. You have to have something in the middle.
Yeah, so I'm
and
hearing
really a
yes.
fourplex.
I'm hearing yes, that statement around not intensification
Thank you.
in neighborhoods is NIMBY. As
We'll now go to the government. MPP Harris.
I'd like to give Mr. Hudak an opportunity to finish his comments, and then I have another quick question for him and one for Mark as well.
I'll be quick. You want to make sure, Chair, that you can build homes that people can afford in big cities and small towns. And if you grew up in Woodstock or Conestoga, right, you always thought if you worked hard, played by the rules, you could afford a home in the community you grew up in. And that's no longer the case. And I think of my own family, Chair, when I was a kid or when Deb and I had our first home, the duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes are really good for that entry-level housing. And I do think, Chair, that the advisable policy that the task force brought forward and we reinforced at AREA is to allow those 4 homes. Cap at 3 stories, great. That's what Toronto has done. But let's get them built and give the keys to some young families.
So I'd just like, Chair, to pivot over to Mark for a second. Mark, my neighbor 10 minutes down the road. Let's talk a little bit about sustainable development in our more rural communities across the province. And I know in the conversation I've had with our rural mayors in particular and other ones across the province, and I know MPP Ray has also had an opportunity to chat with many of them, they want to be able to grow their municipalities. They want to be able to not only build more homes, but provide good jobs and allow for residents and families that have grown up in those communities to be able to stay there and keep sort of the family tradition alive. And I think that's one thing, certainly in farming communities across the province, that really lends to their charm, and it's part of that rural way of life. And I just wanted to get some of your thoughts. Obviously, like you said, the region of Waterloo does some things well and could probably do some other things better. But just sort of generally as a whole, how do you view sustainable development in rural communities, and how do we strike that balance between providing housing, providing good jobs, but also making sure that we're able to keep that rural way of life going?
Well, I would use Waterloo as an example. So we designated a long time ago certain places that could grow and certain places that couldn't. Utilized the fact that it is very expensive to service far-flung communities with municipal septic and municipal water, and that it is a lot cheaper to service them in a place like a city or a larger town. And in terms of affordability of housing, it is far cheaper to provide housing in a city or a town than it is out in a suburb. It just is. One of the things that concerns us in the rural community, especially in the farming community, is the push to grow suburbs that are far-flung at lower densities. They gobble up farmland, and in the end, they cost everyone a lot more money because of the cost of servicing. Let's continue to build things in a compact form. Let's build livable communities where people want to be. One of the things that has interested me in Waterloo Region is that when we build a big building, which we have been approving at the rate of about 1 a week over the past year, is that every one of those units is pre-sold before you put a shovel in the ground. And when people say people don't want to live in tall buildings, they're wrong, because a certain demographic does want to live in those kind of buildings. And not everyone has to live in a great big tall building. For goodness sakes, let's build all those things in the middle. Provide choice. I think when you are building housing, you have to provide choice. And you will find that many people choose to live in places that you don't think that they would.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because there's been there's been a push for through the municipalities, in fact, to build some of those sort of, we'll say, low-rise residential units in places like Elmira and New Hamburg, Baden, that corridor. And the community has pushed back against it, which is interesting. We've talked about NIMBYism today. It's been a bit of a theme. So what would you say to those municipal leaders that want to build those types of housing, but are getting pushback from residents that don't necessarily want to see it?
Well, I'll use my fellow presenter here as words, Mr. Hudak, who said, "Grow a spine." One of the things that's happened over a period of years in Waterloo Region, and I'm talking about the cities, primarily Waterloo and Kitchener, our politicians did not back down. They said, this is a choice that we will make. We will facilitate higher density, we will facilitate intensification, and we will build it in a way and in a place where people want to live and grow. And they did not back down. One of the ironies about small towns who say they don't want intensification is the reason they want to live there is because it's a small town. If you build suburbs all around it, it's no longer a small town. You've defeated your original purpose. I think people actually do have, politicians and people in the community do have to grow a spine and say, we have to make a choice. Do you want to preserve farmland? Do you want to preserve the land that produces food? Do you want to preserve the natural environment? Do you want to build and live in a place that's affordable? The affordable place is inside the urban envelope. It's not outside it. And I think these are choices that we have to make not for only us, but for our children and our grandchildren, and dare I say, utilize the Indigenous principle, plan for 7 generations. We don't do that. We're stuck on this 4-year cycle. For goodness sakes, what do you want your children to, what kind of a place do you want your children and your grandchildren to live in? I want mine to live in a place where they can live in a house that's affordable. I want them to eat food that's produced close to them.
Unfortunately, a limited amount of time, but we can most certainly carry on this conversation at another date. I wanted to just pivot over to Tim quickly. You had mentioned high interest rates being a barrier to building housing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
1 minute.
And what you're hoping to see in regards to the Bank of Canada over the next little while and bringing those interest rates down?
Thank you, through you, Chair, Member Conestoga. I love to see all parties chase after the federal government to actually and the Bank of Canada. The interest rate's been too high for too long. They promised us, right, that if inflation got out of control, they lower rates. So first-time buyers could get into the market. Move-up buyers could, refinance and free up that single-family home. And they betrayed that trust. Inflation is under control. You take out, Chair, costs from rental and from mortgages that are artificially inflated by interest rates. It's down around 2%. So while governments can make good initiatives to get more homes built, you've got the Bank of Canada rolling in the wrong direction. I would love to see more voices saying, get interest rates down, let people get in the market.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now go to the MPP Bell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the presenters, all of you, for coming in and speaking today. I know you have a very busy schedule. I have some questions for Mark Rusa and Tim from OREA. Okay, so my questions are to Mark first. So the province gave municipalities targets to do its part to address the housing shortage. So each municipality had to, agree to build a certain number of homes within a certain period of time, or at least approve building starts. Has Waterloo met its housing targets?
They have not, although I will say that there are currently 30,000 approved lots in Waterloo Region that have not been built on. That is not the fault of the municipality. The municipality has done all its due diligence and has provided those approvals. Other issues, including interest rates, have gotten in the way. So I would suggest that place the blame in the appropriate place. Don't place it on municipalities that have done their job and done it well.
We were pleased to see that the government is introducing a use it or lose it policy in this bill to give municipalities the tools to motivate developers who are sitting on land to begin building. My second question is, and this is again to you, Mark, what do you think of the move in Bill 185 to permit appeals for municipalities that say no to low density on farmland, but the government is banning appeals if a municipality says yes to low density on farmland? So essentially, if a municipality says yes to sprawl, you can't appeal it. And if a municipality says no to sprawl, a developer can appeal it. Do you have a position on that?
Well, my fellow presenter here has talked about frivolous appeals. And frivolous appeals are always an issue. But I will suggest that third-party appeals are incredibly necessary in our democratic society. They're the relief valve for people who disagree. So important to have that third-party appeal. If it's limited only to developers, It's grossly unfair. For goodness sakes, allow the public to participate in the process and appeal. There may be ones that are frivolous. OLT has the power to throw those out. But deal with the ones that are legitimate, because they are legitimate. It's not only good for us, it's good for the government to have a relief valve. Keep third-party appeals.
Thank you very much for that, Asquith. I have a question for you too, so I'm going to get to Tim and then Asquith. Okay, my second question is to Tim. Thanks so much for coming here. We know that you sat on the Housing Affordability Task Force that the government established. What are some recommendations that were put forward by the Housing Affordability Task Force that you'd like the government to move forward on?
Thank you, MPP Bell, and thank you for your work on the housing side. We really like what you're doing around strata housing as well, a new ownership model they talked about earlier on that will create more affordable options. So continued success. Look, I think the three, I'll emphasize three that are in the Housing Affordability Task Force that have not yet been implemented. You start heading, Chair, in the direction the government is in Bill 185, allowing water and wastewater to be done as utility. So it's paid by users over time, amortized like you would a mortgage. This is the way in Ontario we build hydroelectricity through our LDCs and the way we build natural gas. So you should do that for water and sewer. If you don't, it's $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 on the top price of a home for that buyer. If you spread the cost across many years, Chair, that will knock that off the price. Number two on the list is allowing fourplexes. As right, I addressed that earlier on. This really is going to be the key to home ownership for many first-time buyers and for empty nesters. And third and finally, we really need to upzone along major transportation corridors. There is a fundamental shift that's taken place in the use of commercial properties in a hybrid work model. There's not as much demand on commercial usage. We're seeing more products shifted away from retail. So where you can, converting commercial buildings into residential or mixed use, MPP Bell, I think that will make a really big difference. Environmentally friendly too. I know it's an issue that you stand for because it's already serviced, it's existing buildings. That would really open the door to homeownership as well, Chair.
Thank you. We will be introducing an amendment to allow fourplexes as of right, and I'm looking forward to seeing how the government will be voting on that. My hope is that you vote yes. My final question is to Asquith. Thank you so much for coming here. What are the top two things that the government can do to spur the construction of purpose-built rental?
Oh, geez, just two. So as of right, zoning for purpose-built rental is one. Zoning is one of the key pieces that adds to the time, and because time is money in our business, the cost of building. The other is some form of density bonus, and I don't mean going back to the sort of Monty Hall checkbook planning Section 37 process. I mean something that is more set in stone, where you can know what you're applying for and know what you're getting and have a set price you can build into your pro forma for that. Those would be the two, I guess, biggest pieces off the top of my head.
Thank you to all of you for coming in. I appreciate it.
Okay. 1.4 left. Oh, MPP 5.
Thank you very much. So, Mark, just to go back to Wilmot, because we can't let this continue. It's such a dangerous precedent. And when farmers find out that any government can do this to them, basically take their land without consultation, without due process, without any transparency, this is I think what's happening in Wilmot actually is ground zero for irresponsible land use planning. Where do you see the point of trust being rebuilt in this relationship?
So I'll answer it in this way. Being a farmer, one of the things I do is invest in my land and infrastructure on my land. And one of the reasons why I feel comfortable doing that is because because of the security and the permanence of things like a countryside line. The particular piece of land you're talking about now is owned by 5 farmers. They are now thinking, even if there is no development there, are they going to invest 1 cent in tile drainage on that land? or a farm building or a grain bin or anything else when they can never be assured again that this won't happen tomorrow?
Even if we win, we lose, because it's shifted that relationship between regional and provincial government and farmers.
We'll now go to the government, to MPP. Oh, right.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a long day. Thank you to the presenters for coming in, and for those who joined us virtually. My question is to FRPO. Thank you for your presentation. I was just wondering, in your opinion, I know our government changed the rent control exemption, as I'm sure you're very well aware. In your opinion and your association, do you believe that is beneficial to getting more purpose-built rentals built in Ontario?
Yes, and the numbers, indicate that fairly well. I don't have them here in front of me, but since bringing back those provisions in, I want to say, November of 2018, we have seen a pretty sizable increase in the number of housing starts.
Thank you. I defer to MPP Hogarth if she has.
MPP Hogarth?
I know I have to be on TV soon, so first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. It's a really interesting discussion, and it goes back to my days when I was parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Housing. And my first question actually is for you, Tim, if you don't mind me calling you Tim, of course, from OREA, and your comments about what the government can do. And you mentioned co-ownership, and I'm really intrigued by that. Back in 2019, we passed a private member's bill about the Golden Girls Act. And I know my colleague from Burlington Oakville, North Burlington, I should get that correct, was involved with that as well. And it allowed seniors, it changed the Planning Act to allow seniors to live together. And it was, I think it's a great opportunity and a great model. Can you just explain a little bit what co-ownership is? Is it similar to the private members bill? It was Bill 69, the Golden Girls Act. Is that what that is? Is it similar?
Yeah, I thank the Parliament for the question. Of course, the Golden Girls Act Golden Girls was way before your time. You probably don't remember that was a TV show in the 80s. And I might, Chair, if it's okay with you, our President-elect Kathy Pullen could speak about this, what she sees in small town, if we had the time. Look, co-ownership allows many people, like seniors living together, to have a stake in the home. Shared equity models would allow an outside investor. It could be a pension fund. It could be the government. It could be individual investment fund to co-own the home, and then that helps somebody get in the market by helping with the down payment. And then when the home is sold down the road, they get a share of the profits from that. So that helps you get into the marketplace. It's kind of like a modern rent-to-own. The third one I'd stress, Chair, is using government land to target housing for first-time buyers and quality rentals. They did this in New York City with government land there. 160,000 homes were built in that kind of model. Kathy, did you want to add to that?
I just think in small towns, I would consider mine one of the smaller towns and the ones that I service, we're seeing multi-generational homes more so than people living together. I myself have my parents in an in-law suite in my house. Well, my father, he's 88 years old. Easy for me to go down and see how he's doing and making sure that he eats every day. So I think in small town cities or towns, we're seeing more multi-generational than friends living with friends.
We see that a lot of that in my community as well. People are actually purchasing their parents' home and then either moving their parents into a side or building a suite in the back or buying them a condominium just so they can live in their neighborhoods. It's just a model that works for people because, as we know, we need to build 1.5 million homes and we shouldn't leave anything off the table. There's a lot of ways we can get this done, and I just want to thank both of you for your advocacy towards this and helping us get these homes built and built quick. And I know we have a problem with interest rates, as you've mentioned. Now, I don't remember your name from FRPO. Asquith. Do you have any comments on interest rates or what's happening right now that we're trying to get shovels in the ground when it comes to building rental homes?
Definitely a big impediment. As I said in my remarks, the starts aren't where we would like them to be, and definitely you would see some changes if rates came down. I had attended the Canadian Apartment Investment Conference, which is usually in September, back in September of 2022, and that's when we started to see the, escalation from the Bank of Canada. It was almost like pin drop silence in the room, because that same morning we had a rate increase that was announced, and you could hear almost the projects sort of get put onto the shelf as that announcement was made. There are many factors that go into to building rental, and ensuring as much fixed cost on the pro forma as opposed to variable cost is key, and interest rates being what they are now are definitely problematic in terms of getting projects over the finish line into application.
By riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore, you see a lot of cranes in the air. We are building a lot of condominiums along the Queensway. We have Humber Bay Shores along Lakeshore. And then some of these developments are stalled. So now we're seeing some holes in the ground. So we really want to make sure that we keep our interest rates down to get these projects moving so people can have a roof over their head. Just thank you again for being here today.
Thank you.
Oh, MPP Mark? Oh, okay. If there's no further questions from that, that concludes the questions for the panel. We thank the panel very much for taking the time to prepare and to so ably come and put your positions forward. That concludes our presentations for today. So, are there any comments or questions before we conclude? MPP Harris.
Thank you, Chair. I move that the committee enter closed session for the purpose of organizing committee business.
Okay. There's no debate on that, so with...
It's a motion, so it's debatable.
Oh, it's debatable. Question on the motion? It's the adjournment that's not debatable. Any discussion? If not, are you ready to vote? All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion's carried. We'll break for while we go in camera.